Good afternoon. It's 12 noon on Wednesday, the 10th of April, 2019. Thank you very much indeed for taking time out to listen to this 1-hour webinar. Lots of information to share with you. And let's click on. You can ask your questions by Friday, 12 noon on 12th of April. Any questions you've got, please send them through. Short questions will be answered. If they're longer case history questions, then we'll put those into our clinical education forum, if we may. And please, now in fact, that site is no longer relevant for the clinical education website. So what we'll do is we're going to send you all a notification of the new address for clinical education forum. So it's great I spotted that error because it's changed. We've changed our LinkedIn forum to a new platform. Some of you may have joined, some of you may not have done. A lot of information to get through today. Here are the learning objectives, which I'm not going to read through because you can read through them too, but really about why have we got so many allergies, what's the mechanisms involved. We've got two different hypotheses. One is a hygiene hypothesis, another one is a toxin hypothesis. We'll look at and talk about Th1, Th2, see which cytokines are common for those two aspects of our immune system. We're going to focus on how to support mucosal immunity, how to dampen mast cell activation. So we'll talk about mast cells as well. Focus on a probiotic that's had lots of research on it that helps to reduce allergic potential. And also look at luteolin, which is probably more powerful, more effective than quercetin. Love them both for helping clients reduce their allergic symptoms. And then I'm going to give you a little model at the end, which looks at how to appraise allergy and hay fever and knowing what to do for your client. So lots of info. I'm not going to dwell on certain slides. Certain slides are references. I'll skip by them. Other slides, which will be a page for you on your PDF document. Other slides, I've highlighted the relevant sort of key lesson from that particular slide. So some slides I'm going to go through quickly, as I do, in order to give you the gist of things. So really, it's a reference document for you, I hope, in the future, going back to look at specific aspects of allergy and hay fever. So the rise and rise of allergies, yes, we've all known that everybody knows allergies are increasing, but so have intolerances and these things called sensitivities. Now, an intolerance is actually the inability to break down something in one's gut. So lactose intolerance is an intolerance. I'm sure you know this. And sensitivities is an immune reactivity that's non-IgE mediated, so it's an IgG or other reactivity. Could be IgM, could be IgA as well. And they are controversial because it's a bit of a grey area, and all the work's really been done in terms of allergy with IgE. It can also be reflective of a reaction to something that we've eaten, as well as chemicals we're exposed to. And of course, we've got so many chemicals. For those of you who listened to the liver detox webinar, one of the last ones I presented, 200,000, 180 to 200,000 chemicals have been added to our planet in the last 60, 70 years. It's a frightening array. These things also have an impact. So it's interesting to note that the allergic disposition has increased in industrial countries rather than in those individuals living in the countryside, effectively. It's believed that an imbalance in microbes or a reduced microbial exposure from the outside, together with reduced microbes on the inside of our gut, can lead us to basically an allergic dominant response. This is known as the hygiene hypothesis. And here it is. I'm presenting this to you. It's something I think we may have learned when we were studying and being aware of. So here's the model. We live in a hygienic living condition, and then there's less microbial stimulation. And with that, we have a reduced Th1 immune response. The two main cytokines involved in supporting the Th1 immune response is interferon gamma, you can see in the top right, and interleukin 12. Bear in mind these, when I first see these things, I think, well, whatever, I don't really understand what they are, but bear in mind interferon gamma and interleukin 12, so we'll come back to those. Equally, with antibiotic exposure, which is why we all look at our clients' antibiotic history, you can have even one course of antibiotics can do, it doesn't have to, and it may not, but it can diminish intestinal flora. So you have a dysbiosis or insufficiency dysbiosis without any unwanted bugs. And as a result of that, we actually have a decreased T regulation immune response. And all that tends to increase the Th2 immune response. And we've got interleukin 4 in particular, but interleukin 5 and 13 are also involved in mediating that immune response. And that leads to allergic, it says diseases here, but really it's allergic responses. So that's the hygiene theory. So basically we've got tidier and tidier, mopping up bugs, and antibiotics on the inside, and lo and behold, we've got more allergy involved. So effectively, these studies which have concentrated on the hygiene hypothesis have shown that if we're exposed to substances early in life, we tend to have, we don't have any reactions to them later on, so we have tolerance. In this particular study in 2011, they followed 600 children until the age of 18, and they looked at children raised in homes with cats during the first year of life, and they had about half the relative risk of developing allergies to these animals in adulthood. So lo and behold, you expose them earlier, you have less reaction later. They've also done studies with boys and girls living indoors with a dog, and that was the same for them. It seems that children born by cesarean section will trend towards a higher allergenic risk. This is because they have the lack of the gut flora, same as the antibiotic risk. So exposure to allergens, airborne, food, animals, etc., consistently generate immunological benefit for a lifetime of exposures and extend their tolerance benefits beyond the selected triggers, it says, suggesting we're best served by experiencing a wide range of triggers in appropriate doses and settings from an early age. So playing in the mud in the garden when we're a baby and when we're a toddler may have been a very good thing. Not sure about eating the soil, but even that may have had benefit. Antibiotics early in life. There is a positive association between the early life exposure to antibiotics and the development of allergic diseases. So that supports the notion of a gut microbiome being diminished. And here we have a nice graph showing the allergy epidemics that have occurred in time. And it's pre-hygiene, before 1870, although of course we were living in houses then compared to huts. And we can see that there are various different manifestations have occurred. We've got the seasonal allergic rhinitis was the first one in 1870. It's interesting that in 1911, immunotherapy for hay fever began then. We got chlorination of water in 1920. We got 1946, New York tries to deal with the ragweed and eliminate it. 1969, there was increased asthma in Birmingham schools, and of course this is very relevant and pertinent this week because ULEX came into effect, which is the in London the emissions ultra low emissions zone ULEZ, not ULEX, ULEZ came into effect on Monday. So in cars that were too old and got too much diesel were paying £12 a day in London from Monday. So we go back to 1969 and recognise that the awareness of air pollution is something that's been recorded effectively. Peanut allergy, much greater since 1995. And we had a peak of asthma prevalence and severity shortly after that. So it just gives an indication of allergy epidemics effectively. Now, there's a lot of talk and something we learn about, and it is confusing and it's not always easy to understand. And I think it's a bit simplistic on occasion too, is the Th1, Th2 immune response. And effectively, in short, and I've highlighted these two sentences, the Th2 immune response is often regarded as being dedicated to the allergic response, and it reflects antibody production and something called eosinophil activation. Eosinophils are often indicated in blood tests where they break down the immune cells. Th1 type cytokines, on the other hand, are producing pro-inflammatory responses for killing intracellular infections such as bacteria and viruses. And so you've got different types of interleukins and cytokines associated with Th1 and Th2 response. Here is a picture, not as clear as it could be, apologies for that. And we look at on the right hand side, Th1, Th2, you can see you've got interferon gamma, TNF alpha, and whereas on Th2 you've got interleukin 4 with a series of others. So yes, there's a crossover certainly, but in terms of things that drive allergies, Th2 like drives allergy, and Th1 tends to interferon gamma, as we talked about, is the main Th1 cytokine. So those individuals who've got atopy, hay fever, and asthma, and so on, they have a higher level of Th2 immune responders and associated cytokines. That's been shown. And the cells involved in mediating this response is eosinophils, we talked about that briefly, and mast cells, which I'll show you more information of a bit later. And they are the mediators of allergic responses. So they're basically, it's a natural phenomenon, and they're designed for that purpose. So we've got the hygiene hypothesis, and then we've got these mediators. And then we've got the toxin hypothesis. This I really recommend at the bottom here. You can see Ruslan Medjitov, PhD. I've given you a link there, and I really recommend you have a look at that when you have a moment. It's really fascinating. It has a broad breadth of of interest and scientific study, and that's really associated with Yale. Very, very interesting indeed. And he's actually supporting the notion of this sort of toxin hypothesis. And essentially, he's maintaining that the allergic immunity is actually a defense against noxious substances or xenobiotics, including venoms, something called hematopathous fluids, environmental xenobiotics, and I'll talk about that more, and irritants, things that irritate the skin. I guess nickel will be one of those. He argued that the defense against so-called macroparasites is only one of several functions of type 2 immunity, and he proposes that type 2 immune responses evolved to protect us from at least 4 different classes of these environmental challenges: helminths, noxious xenobiotics, venoms, and environmental irritants. And I'll talk to you more about the second one, the noxious xenobiotics. And this was first proposed, as I track back and try to find when this first was identified in the literature anyway, back in 1991 in Berkeley, where Mr. M. Prophet, I thought what a great name that was for foreseeing the future of how immunology would go. Allergy evolved as the last line of defense against an extensive array of toxic substances that exist in our environment. They were natural environmental toxins in plants and so on, but also something that now develops a reaction against man-made substances as well, of which now we've got 180 to 200,000 to deal with. The chemicals released by these cells, mast cells, during an IgE antibody response causes a wide array of symptoms, so from vomiting, diarrhea, coughing, tearing, swelling, scratching, etc. And that's all designed to expel from the body the toxic substance which triggered the response in the first place. So it's supposedly an allergy protects against acute toxicity. It's also hypothesized that by protecting against that toxicity, allergy may defend us against mutagens and carcinogens, interestingly. And here's the model that was published by Medjitov's team, and he's got his own laboratory at Yale. And I like this document. So we can look at noxious xenobiotics being exposed to something, and it could be nickel, or it could be some pesticide, or it could be some plant substance as well. And looks at the various different allergic host defenses. And this is something that we've all been aware of. We say, well, the barrier enhancements, we've got to make sure we've got our skin intact. And then the next thing is our mucosal immune system within, where 70% of the immune system cells may lie. So really important for mucus secretion. Removal, expulsion, so we've got those activities associated with allergy. You've got the inactivation or killing, so you've got eosinophil-mediated helminth killing and mast cell-mediated venom detoxification. But venomous aside and helminths aside, it's these cells that produce these molecules in order to deal with what they believe is an antigen that they should be dealing with effectively to inactivate it. So it's a completely natural response, but it's this reaction which causes the unpleasant symptoms. And what, 20 million people in the UK with hay fever? I mean, it's a big issue. There's also something called restriction, tissue protection and repair, and avoidance. Now, we all say with allergies, you avoid them, or you avoid xenobiotics, you avoid them. But sometimes if there's if pesticides being sprayed in the farmer's field over there and the wind's blowing, it's very difficult to avoid it unless we wear a gas mask or shut the doors and have an air filter on the inside. So avoidance is the obvious thing. And those with nickel allergy, for example, they don't wear nickel, and then they don't get the red skin where the nickel comes into contact with them. So I like this model. I think it's a really useful gauge. And this is the description of the above slide, which I'm not going to go through, but it just describes it. So the focus of this particular part of our webinar is looking at the xenobiotics, and it seems that in some cases these xenobiotics, these toxins, may cause an allergic response if the CP450 detox system is insufficient to prevent the noxious effects. So the second class, so once it gets transformed, so it's gone through the body, we've eaten it or breathed it in. The second class of these noxious xenobiotics are called haptens. And they're reactive chemicals that have a propensity to form adducts, bonds with proteins. So now they don't look different, they look different to the original protein in the body, protein adducts. So these xenobiotics are noxious because of their adduct formation, and it can alter protein conformation and functions, leading to toxic effects. So haptenation makes otherwise inert proteins immunogenic. It's something that our immune system reacts to, leading to IgG1 antibody production, which is designed to promote their clearance, thereby protecting us from that. So haptenation actually converts something, because it's an inefficient process in clearing something, it converts A into B, and B becomes something to which the body has an immune response. And that's believed to be, according to this hypothesis, something that actually then leads to our ability to clear it from the system. So exposure to reactive haptens can also stimulate inflammasome activation, so systemic inflammation. I mean, it could be local, of course, but it's inflammasome activation, so we get an inflammatory response. It's supposed to be doing us a favor, but this is what leads to the unpleasant symptoms of reactivity. So once the skin barrier is breached, these reactive haptens induce a Th2-based response, which basically leads to an allergic immune protection from these reactive chemicals, apparently to provide us some protection from these reactive chemicals. Of course, there are so many chemicals around now, and then our immune system gets overwhelmed, perhaps. So the theory of the toxin hypothesis maintains that allergic responses protect us from environmental xenobiotics by increased mucosal production, keratinocyte hyperplasia, and then we have these various different manifestations of allergy. Itch, bronchoconstriction reduces entry of further noxious substances into the body, vomiting and diarrhea to get rid of it, complement activation, which helps promote clearance, and vascular leakage even, which dilutes the noxious substance. The solution to pollution is dilution. I remember learning that in 1990. So some more information here, and it's talking about penicillin. I didn't know this before I knew it, which is preparing this webinar. I didn't know that penicillin was very poorly dealt with in the body, and it's immunologically inert in non-sensitized people, but it's the hapten, which is a conjugated form of penicillin, that appears to be immunogenic. So this basically, it's the metabolism of something into something else that leads to reactivity, and it seems that most idiosyncratic, of course they're testing for these genetically now in the States in particular, drug reactions of an allergic etiology are basically, they think the same mechanism. It's the way that the drug is metabolized into something that then becomes something which is an haptenated form. And the haptenated form then elicits the immune response. So the questions here is, if the allergic response was involved for defense purposes, what was the reason for the extraordinary level of sensitivity of allergen recognition? And walking into a room, there could be parts per million in the air of something, or parts per million in the food, and one can have a reaction to it. So it's a good question. And what's the purpose of this sensing minuscule amounts of allergen when the level of exposure is clearly far too low to cause any harm? So this is talking about allergic hypersensitivity, and it's believed to evolve to survey the environment, so it's air, water and food, for the presence of these unpleasant substances so that we can be warned. So it's a natural defense mechanism. And once the exposure to noxious environmental substances has taken place and the IgE is generated, memory of the allergen exposure can develop. After being sensitized and developing the IgE, subsequent exposure even to minute amounts of allergen in a given environment will result in an allergic reaction, which has two purposes. One, it will give us an anticipatory response to help minimize the harmful effects of engaging in more of that exposure. And second, it will encourage effectively improved detoxification. I said that's the wrong way around, effectively. So we get to actually, we help to detoxify the substance and as well step away from that environment. Oh, I've got into that environment sneezing, I better opt out of it. I put my nickel jewelry on, got a reaction, I better take it off. So the exquisite sensitivity to allergens triggers avoidance of what's perceived as a suboptimal environment. Show me the environment that's not suboptimal nowadays outside. Repeated exposure may also condition future avoidance of suboptimal environments, as well as specific sources of noxious substances and specific foods and plants. Many of you may have done some gardening and end up with a significant rash and try to figure out what that was from. So the very nature of allergic reactions suggests they're engaged to reduce exposure and promote expulsion of unwanted environmental substances. So that's the toxic hypothesis, and it explains the main phenomena of allergy, which is shown on this page here. It's basically why they occur within minutes of exposure to an allergen, so it happens, and why they're so severe, and why the symptoms of allergy include the vomiting, diarrhea, coughing, sneezing, and itching, and so on. Why covalent binding of low molecular weight substances to serum proteins frequently causes allergy. So that's where you get that going on. So it's like haptenation, why it causes allergy. The body recognizes that as a bad guy, whereas sometimes you can have innocuous substances that are metabolized in the body that then lead to reactivity after they've been metabolized somewhat by the body. and also why allergies occur to many foods, pollens, venoms, metals such as nickel, which is the obvious one, and drugs, including penicillin. Also explains why allergic cross-reactivity occurs to foods and pollens from unrelated botanical families, because it's a hypersensitive reaction to minuscule amounts of something, which could be in different foods and different substances. So cross-reactivity. And for those of you who've conducted food reactivity tests, I think with any lab really, you're going to find someone who's got a reaction to pineapple or something, and they never eat pineapple, or reaction to I think about another one, but coffee, in the sense that I've never drunk coffee and I've got a reaction to it. And then clients can often say, well, because it's come up with that, I'm going to dismiss all the results. You may have come across that too. I don't understand it. And it's cross-reactivity. This cross-reactivity is so I think so common, and also appears why allergy is so capricious and variable, and also why allergy is more prevalent in industrial societies than it is in foraging societies. More exposure to noxious environments. Here's a brief case. Here's a boy, JB, 14 years old, and from the age of 12 onwards, he'd had a history of airborne reactions to dust, mold, and pollens, nuts, milk. He had a history of eczema in the past, so atopy in the past. At he had 5 to 6 years of 5 to 6 years of age, sneezing, itchy eyes, congestion. He had for the last 5 or 6 years had these symptoms. So affecting his head and his brain, difficult to study, really tough for him to make progress at school. And also the last couple of years or so, he had spaciness with his allergy symptoms. So literally just couldn't get his brain to gear, really tough for him to study at school. Look at his age, so it's first year of GCSEs. And for the last couple of years, interestingly, he'd also had weak nails, dry hair, and poor teeth condition. Interesting, sort of connective tissue issue. His goals were to be free of the allergies, free of the symptoms, free of bloating, free of spaciness, to feel grounded, and also to have strong connective tissue as well. And also, I wrote the last one to identify why he has the allergies and to correct it. The food list that he provided went through very carefully, and I recommended him to avoid. So step number 1, you avoid the allergen, the trigger, the nightshade, citrus, gluten, dairy, oats, and corn. And then have lots of sweet potato instead. So I recommended Saccharomyces boulardii, the probiotic yeast. You may all be familiar with that. Lactobacillus GG, the most researched probiotic bacteria. Full spectrum digest, a vegetarian formula that breaks down endo and exopeptidases to minimize the risk of exposure to antigenic proteins. And methionine, which is useful histamine binder. I'll go into that in more detail. So that's what was recommended. Strict adherence to the diet, follow up in April, so not long after we first met him. Allergies much better, 90% reduction in the sneezing. Major nasal congestion went to minor. The itching lasted for 3 weeks before it disappeared. Interesting how some allergic symptoms can last longer than others. No sore eyes, no cough, no bloat. His brain spaces improved, study was much better, really making progress with that. And interestingly, his connective tissue is much stronger as well, and his energy improved for his BMX biking. The changes made a massive difference, he said, and his mum said. And he can actually go out of the house in the evening with friends, which he'd not been able to do for years, simply because he had such bad reactivity. And so the whole family benefited from that. So a significant improvement in how he was. The second program, I recommended he carry on with the Lactobacillus GG, but stop the S. boulardii and keep on with the enzyme, keep on with methionine. And I recommended an antibacterial, anti-yeast agent with dinner, because I suspected, again, with further details, that he might have had an imbalance in gut bacteria and or yeast. Follow up in June. This was June last year, all been well, and then he basically thought things had gone so well and he neglected to take the supplements so well. So when they came back, he should have run out of the supplements, but he had a full 15-day supply, indicating that he'd taken about half or less of the supplements that I recommended, and his symptoms began to return. It's the sort of thing that I would engage clients with in reducing the supplements to see what lowest level they could achieve and not have reactions and have the same benefits. But effectively, he took the supplements again and the symptoms resolved. Again, his brain function was better, everything was better, in spite of the very high pollen levels in his area at that time of the year. So I recommend to carry on with the 3 of the supplements he'd had before, but also introduce Allergy L92, which I shall talk to you about, which contains 4 nutrients in particular, 3 in particular perhaps help with allergy. This Lactobacillus strain L92, luteolin and boswellia, along with vitamin C. So anti-inflammatory, anti-allergy ingredients. 1 week later on his program, he'd resolved all of his symptoms once more. And here are the likely mechanisms that led to the resolution of his symptoms. So a really great result. They got exactly what they came in for with the minimal intervention. Avoiding the foods is vital, I think, and that's really important. If you keep on eating the foods to which you're reacting, it's probably going to be impossible to suppress the symptoms without steroids. He avoided the trigger foods, which we are able to identify, and I have to say that's not a small thing to do, except the ones I identified are common foods to which people react. But because we've got gluten, grains, non-gluten grains, dairy, sheep and goats as well, and then you've got nightshade family and citrus. So you've got obvious food types, but look at the food diary. Ask them to keep a food diary and look at any observation of symptoms. With allergy that's immediate, it can be quite easy to identify what it was in time that they reacted to. But with delayed reactivity, it can be quite difficult, as we know. However, coming back to JB, he avoided the trigger foods. He was able to break down the food proteins better, vital. So that was with the full spectrum digest. If you can't break down the proteins, you end up with reactivity. Again, it's a massive burden in terms of numbers of molecules in the gut that can then tip over the threshold to induce allergy. We also gave him mucosal immune support by improved T regulation cell induction with the Espulade and Lactobacillus GG in particular. We also gave him anti-inflammatory support. The 2 probiotics have an anti-inflammatory action, and also the Allergies L92 has a potent anti-inflammatory effect. We also help to bind and break down histamine, binding onto it with methionine. I've used methionine for that purpose since 1992. I remember the first instance after reading about Carl Pfeiffer's work looking at high histamine and low histamine individuals. That's more associated with psychological mental health, but very, very useful. Methionine is an essential amino acid, and yes, we know it's the precursor as part of the homocysteine cycle, and often individuals might not know it's just a very good histamine binder as well. So here are some nutritional supplements to consider, and the way we're looking at it is we want a natural antihistamine with natural anti-inflammatory support. We want to break down histamine, and histamine A requires copper, but I'm not sure I've got that in here to indicate that, but do bear that in mind. So low copper could be a factor, and binding onto histamine. I've often found the binding is more effective than the breaking down in my clinical experience. We want to have an immune modulation occurring, but support mucosal immune support. Those things can be synonymous sometimes, as well as looking at digestive aids from hydrochloric acid, even apple cider vinegar, although that's a pH of 3, and proteolytic enzymes to break down the proteins. Very important. So here's the model looking at what to consider for hay fever and allergy. We've got immune modulation on the left-hand side with T regulation induction. So we have the balanced Th1, Th2 response. We also want a natural antihistamine. It's really palliative, support and reduce inflammation. Remember, the allergic responses trigger the inflammasome activity. You want to reduce that. Then the histamine breakdown and binding, as I've indicated, I find the binding is something that is very possible. Vitamin C and methionine and vitamin C can be very useful for that. Mucosal immune support with Treg induction, and then digestive support, vital. I've had some patients with hay fever who've taken hydrochloric acid supplements and the hay fever has gone away, just taking the hydrochloric acid. And it's really those experiences over a long period of time of practice of 28 years of seeing individuals who've done singular things and then had an outcome that helps one to understand that it was that variable that brought about that impact. But for most of us, we're recommending a number of things, so it's difficult to actually attribute what benefit is due to what particular intervention. I acknowledge that. And here I've translated the aim on an immune or histamine level translated it into products to consider. These are the ones I've got experience with. They're the only ones I've known for 28 years, so I'm sharing them with you. And some of them are new products. The Allergies L92 on the left-hand side and in the middle, it's a new product. Now, I'll be talking about some of the ingredients in that, which is because it's had the most success that I've ever witnessed really with allergy and hay fever. There are individuals, of course, like I said, who might take hydrochloric acid or might take methionine and have a tremendous benefit from those alone. So these are things to consider. Now, I'm not going to recommend all these to a client, no way. It's about looking at which one of these would I choose. So I've selected from what I have in my knowledge bank to be useful for this particular aspect of health with regard to hay fever and allergy, and I put it in the box. It's for you to choose 1 or 2 or 3 of these as appropriate, possibly 4. We'll come on to looking at principles of supplementation. So these supplements may have a benefit, and I've certainly witnessed the benefit of these in my practice. So here's some brief information about quercetin. It's a flavonoid. There are thousands of those. Many plants contain them, and it possesses numerous anti-inflammatory properties. So like luteolin, which we're going to learn more about, it's been found that it is used for more than just anti-histamine or anti-allergy effects, but a wide array of benefits, and actually helps protect against DNA damage as well, and therefore is potentially an anti-tumorigenic product, just like luteolin has been found to do. Anything that reduces inflammation is going to stop the signaling that may have a negative impact on DNA. It helps to reduce the Th2 response, which is what's overactive in allergy, so it stabilizes mast cells and decreases intestinal permeability. Very important indeed. If you've got that going on wrong, then that can lead to a massive array of immune reactivity and increased allergy. It's also shown to reduce histamine release and suppress interleukin 4. Remember, that was the cytokine associated with Th2 activity, and potentially increasing Th1 cytokine production to create that balance in Th1, Th2. Quercetin's also been found to be good for inflammatory skin conditions, not surprisingly given its attributes. The Allergy L92 contains just these ingredients, 11 milligrams of this probiotic, and the study I'm going to talk to you about, what I'll show you, used 22 milligrams, i.e. one capsule of breakfast and dinner, to have a good clinical outcome in the patients who took it. Vitamin C, boswellia, and luteolin. I'll talk to you more about luteolin and L92 in a moment. So here we have a number of slides, which I'm not going to go all through. I'm going to go through these quite quickly, but I wanted this as a point of reference for you. The L92, Lactobacillus L92, and I've got a number of slides on this and on luteolin. Again, not going to read them all, but the specific strain has been widely used in certain supplements in cultured milk and yogurt in Japan. So a lot of the work was done in Japan, and it's been shown to have potent anti-allergic activity, both in vitro and in vivo. I'm always interested in vivo in particular, and not all things translate when it's been in vitro. Does it ever translate into an actual human experience? So what follows is a summary of research on L92, including its proposed mechanisms of actions based on studies and clinical trials. So we know that this is talking about the hygiene hypothesis, so that's a redescription of that, and it's also redescribing some of the cytokines involved in the Th2 response. Like interferon gamma is the prime 1 of Th1, and interleukin 4, not indicated here, is indicated with Th2. And so Th2, it drives this thing called humoral immunity, fighting foreign invaders and substances from outside the cell, inducing immunoglobulin IgE allergic reactions. So Th1 may result in autoimmune disorders if it's dominant, and allergic conditions are linked to Th2 dominance, so a repetition of that information. So really, the idea is that the first thing is we avoid, so you limit exposure. So sorry, I apologize. I'll restart that. So this researcher Wold has identified that by limiting exposure to viruses and pathogenic bacteria as part of the hygiene hypothesis, with that overly hygienic lifestyle in industrialized countries, it alters the normal gut flora in infancy, and that leads to a failure to induce and maintain oral tolerance of innocuous allergens. And that theory is supported by many studies showing that the imbalance of the composition of gut bacteria and those individuals with allergy. And here are references for that. The hygiene hypothesis continues to evolve and be debated. So there are various different versions of the hygiene hypothesis because it doesn't explain everything. And the use of probiotics to help manage allergic diseases continues to be a strong topic for clinical research. As I've indicated in a webinar on probiotics, the number of studies on probiotics since 2000 has been 1,000 per year. I mean, it's a staggering increase. So it's basically 18,000 studies at least since the 19,000 since the year 2000. A large number of studies identified that a number of lactobacilli species may reduce symptoms of allergy. And here are references for that. L92 is a patented lactobacilli strain that's been used in Japan, as discussed already. And here are some indications of how it works. This information is a description of how allergies work, and we've already covered that. and we talked about Th1, Th2, and the human response. So moving on through. Remember, the activated T cells produce cytokines like interleukin 4, 5, and 13. We've already heard that information, seen it. And also, B cells release histamine and leukotrienes from mast cells, and we'll look at mast cells too. So again, repetition of information. The most significant decreases in this particular study of the IgE effect was actually the 2 different strains of Lactobacillus. There's something called Lactobacillus fermentum CP34 and the L. acidophilus L92, which is what we're talking about here. Total levels of IgE and IgG levels were reduced significantly when the mice were fed those strains. These 2 strains also had a higher recovery in the mice's GI tracts, confirming the adhesion. So they actually adhere and colonize in the gut, which is also useful for exerting an immunomodulatory effect. So L92 colonize the gut and reduce inflammation. L92 has been shown to stimulate IL-12 production from dendritic cells, inducing generation of Th1 cells and then suppressing, as a result, Th2 cell response. So L92 operating via a number of different mechanisms. So we have in vitro and in vivo studies. L92 was shown to regulate both the Th1 and Th2 cytokine responses in favor of a Th1 response, reducing allergy effectively. L92 may have an immunomodulating effect by Treg cells via TGF-beta activity. Again, just showing you the details and the mechanisms. So there are a number of different mechanisms that L92 works by. L92, it also speaks to genes. It has an effect on upregulating transcription-regulated genes and genes that encode for chemokines and cytokines. So it has a benefit for Th1, Th2. It supports adhesion of the gut bacteria and the gut immunomodulatory effects there, and also speaks to genes. So some really nice work done on this. There's an acute response and a late phase response in allergies. And it seems that after 24 hours, so it's this late phase response, the transmembrane receptors and transcription regulator genes in the toll-like receptors were upregulated. So if it's been taken for a period of time, you can have further effects and benefits on allergic response. L92 effectively acts on multiple immune response pathways, appearing to converge in one end result. It counter-regulates the Th2 skewed immunity and the subsequent reduction of Th2-mediated allergic responses. And this is what I found in clinical practice. But I find looking at the mechanisms and understanding why helps me to make a choice with the next client I'm seeing as to whether I recommend that. And it's really my go-to, I have to say, it's my go-to supplement of choice for all sort of allergic responses or reactive responses. It's also something that can help with the no-no cycle in chronic fatigue and chemical sensitivity. You may be familiar with that. I'll refer to one supplement that we have. It's the Eclonia cava extract, ECE extract, which is a very potent antioxidant. It's in the supplement Fiber Boost and Fibronol. And I've used that for years with no imbalances with fibromyalgia, chemical sensitivity, and chronic fatigue syndrome, where it's evident that it's a no imbalance. This work was originally conducted by Dr. Marty Paul, PALL, who's really pioneered this work, and now it's more accepted than it was. I found that the Eclonia cava extract can really have a benefit, and I would say that the Allergy L92, and again it's a coincidence because I had someone with chronic fatigue with allergies, I recommend the Allergy L92 to that individual who was taking Fiber Boost, and they had an additive effect, not necessarily synergistic, but certainly an additive effect in terms of helping their energy. So it's really interesting. And then I dug up a bit more work in it, and I found some evidence that the luteolin and the anti-inflammatory effect may have a benefit. I would say probably about 40% of the benefit of Fiber Boost in my rough guide in terms of clinical outcomes. So not only does it have these benefits with allergy and Th1, Th2, but the anti-inflammatory action also appears to have an added benefit with someone with a no imbalance, i.e. chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and chemical sensitivity. So clinical studies with the L92 for a variety of allergic diseases provide further evidence for its use in treatment. The randomized double placebo-controlled trial showing benefit of reducing swelling and nasal mucosa in allergic rhinitis. In atopic dermatitis, it was found to be beneficial too, significantly ameliorating symptoms. And it's showing that in mice, also they had lower levels of mast cells and eosinophils, and Th1, Th2 cytokine expression by taking L92. A double-blind study in atopic dermatitis of 49 patients, again taking 20.7 milligrams, so that's about half what's in the supplement of Allergy. They found that the symptoms in eosinophils, etc., basically were lowered, reflecting the improvements in atopic dermatitis. So this study shows clinical evidence supporting the idea that one mechanism that L92 induces Th1 dominance is through the Treg cells by TGF-beta activity. So again, multiple interventions and effects from L92. And it's basically supporting Th1, Th2 immune balance. I'll move on through these slides. So now we'll talk about mast cells' role in allergy. Now we all know that mast cells are what produce histamine. And here's a simple picture about the food antigen in green, the top left. It comes into contact with an IgE antibody that's been developed because the body's developed an immune activity to something, registered it on a sensitive level, and created an IgE antibody response to the food antigen, lest it ever come across it again. The multivalent food antigen binds and cross-links two or more IgE antibodies. It binds onto them, and that releases the pro-inflammatory mediators following fusion of lysozymes within the cell wall, and lo and behold, you get something called degranulation. And it's not just histamine, but it's a wide array of leukotrienes. But a simple model of looking at mast cells. And here's another very simple sort of model, again, looking at the IgE receptors, and then the antigen presents itself, and then you get the degranulation. As it says here, the mast cells release histamine, but also serotonin, so 5-HT, superoxide, that actually interestingly causes brain fog, and low T3, interesting. Heparin, which is an anticoagulant, tryptase, to break down tryptin, again, break down proteins, so they're less allergenic. Thromboxane, clot forming, so we don't bleed when we're faced with a challenge. And something called PGD2, which constrict airways and may also, interestingly, constrict the blood flow of the hair follicle and contribute to baldness, interestingly. And something called PAF, which causes atherosclerosis. So mast cells are present typically in tissues surrounding the blood vessels and nerves, in your mouth and eyes and eyelids, etc., to react and then expel noxious substances, whether they're an allergen or a xenobiotic. So they play a fundamental role in the occurrence of allergic disease, and because of their hypersensitive response to otherwise innocuous substances that induce allergic reaction. I mean, we've all walked along with someone down the street or outside in the garden or outside on a walk, and they're pulling out their handkerchief and blowing, and their eyes are pouring, and they're blowing the nose, and we're completely fine in the sense that we don't have that kind of reaction. It begins with the interaction of the allergen with something called a polyvalent IgE, and it's got this curious code, the FCERI complex. It's just this receptor on the histamine cell and on the surface of sensitized mast cells that then causes receptor aggregation. So then with the complex series of cascades that many researchers have dedicated their lives to, involves the activation of numerous signaling proteins and something called spleen TK and Lin kinase, lots of kinase enzymes in the body, which in turn cause a series of downstream signal transduction events within the mast cell. So it's a sequence like a domino is occurring within the system from outside the cell, across the membrane and into the cell. And ultimately, the signal transduction leads to calcium influx. Now, where else have we heard that's a negative thing? With glutamate. So glutamate causes a calcium influx, and that's called a neurotoxin when you've got too much glutamate. So calcium influx is almost always a bad thing. And the release of preformed chemical mediators such as histamine from mast cells, as well as the synthesis of lipid mediators, prostaglandins and leukotrienes, and the production of cytokines and chemokines. So there's an awful lot of activity going on. Calcium influx, histamine and leukotriene and prostaglandin release, effectively. So the action of these mediators on their receptors and surrounding tissue effectively results in the inflammation that is visible through perhaps red skin, itchiness, and so on. And so the mast cells are central players in the development and maintenance of allergic, they say diseases here, but allergic imbalances, and are subsequently considered as an attractive therapeutic target in the treatment of these conditions, such as asthma, rhinitis and conjunctivitis, etc. So bear that in mind. And when we talk about luteolin, it inhibits IgE-mediated TNF-alpha and IL-6 production, inhibits IgE, so that's some work there. Flavonoids have been shown to be effective at reducing allergies, that's quercetin and luteolin. And luteolin, the product Allergy, L92, was basically designed to have a more powerful effect than the existing product that Allergy Research make, which is called quercetin 300. I've used that for years, very effective antihistamine, and this was designed to have an extended effect, and I've actually used the two together for even a more profound effect on reducing allergy. So these results here in this study show that luteolin is a potent inhibitor of mast cell activation through the inhibition of calcium influx and PKC activation. So we heard about the calcium influx, so it stops the calcium influx, which then signals what happens thereafter. So it's a potent inhibitor of mast cell activation. And there's something called mast cell activation syndrome, and that's where, again, luteolin and quercetin could be particularly useful. Again, we don't treat any condition, we're looking at supporting the underlying biochemistry. Both of them, these flavonoids, luteolin and quercetin, inhibit the IgE-mediated TNF-alpha and interleukin-4 production, which participate in late phase of type 1 allergic reactions. So again, the evidence as to how they're working. Luteolin has other benefits. I'm looking at effectively for reducing IL-4, and it shows a novel action of flavonoids in the acute phase 1 of allergic reactions. So here we've got luteolin with boswellia in the Allergy L92 product. It summarizes what luteolin does. It basically inhibits allergic reactions, lessens mucus production, diminishes gene activity that increases inflammation as well. So it's a potent anti-inflammatory and strongly inhibits mast cell release of histamine. Fantastic. Such a useful thing. And I've seen this time and time again. It's my go-to product. Boswellia inhibits leukotriene synthesis, so helps with TNF-alpha, interleukin-1 beta, and IL-6. IL-6 is a very powerful inflammatory cytokine. And the vitamin C provides additional antihistamine support in the Allergy L92. So really, anyone with atopy of any kind of allergic reactions, anyone with systemic inflammation, anyone with histamine reactions, or anyone with excess mucus might be a candidate for benefiting from Allergy L92. Here's just one slide or two slides on this. Another case, 45-year-old man, SC, moved into a new home with his family, and he immediately had sneezing and sinus and headache reactions, and there was something in the house, particularly in his office, in his home study. Oh my gosh, I've bought this house, I'm in here, significant effective dysfunction. So I got a call from his wife, what can you do to help, what can you do to help? The wife was an existing client. So as we talking through it, he basically come to the conclusion that it was something from the laminated flooring, and he'd never been exposed to that in his previous existence, just hadn't been there before. He ate a very good, nourishing varied diet because his wife is a client of mine, but she's really into sound nutrition, no history of allergy or immune activity. I recommended it. I haven't met him yet, actually. So in fact, I hadn't met him at this stage, and so I recommended take this until we meet. So it was one with each meal, a bit more than 2 per day, 3 per day of the luteolin, the L92, boswellia, and vitamin C. And within days of taking it, all his symptoms resolved and didn't return. We then met actually. So actually we met at the follow-up. And he's basically taken 1 and 1 since, doesn't want to have a reaction again, so he's taking it prophylactically. Just a really great result, effectively. Just one product making that difference. Other products to consider. Curcuma X. I really recommend you view the product information on this. Having a read of that is really useful. Up to, it's just 5 to 6 times the greater bioavailability compared to other professional brands. And the key thing is, really key, if you get this one fact about this product, is it's fully emulsified. Now, biotics research have a tremendous capability of their technology in making fully emulsified products. Not all products that are emulsified are fully emulsified by any means. With emulsification, what it means is it's absorbed before it gets to the liver. Now, I've had individuals react with turmeric. Turmeric can influence phase 1, the up to 58 cytochrome P450 enzymes, and it can influence phase 2 as well. Not always in a helpful way. It's something that I really want to have absorbed into the bloodstream before it gets to the liver, and this is what this one does. It's the emulsified nature which does that, but also they've used the whole of the turmeric complex, well, it delivers 50% total curcuminoid content, but also hundreds, up to 200, I think, other naturally occurring compounds, sesquiterpenes, sterols, fatty acids, and others. So really, they've got a great technology in producing it. It's a small little orange capsule, and really you'd have no idea by looking at it that it's such an effective thing compared to other turmeric products, which I know talk about their bioavailability, but they're not emulsified, absorbed before the first liver pass. And I find that many individuals don't tolerate turmeric, interestingly, in one form or another, and that's why I like the emulsified form. Kappa S now contains that form of turmeric, where it didn't before. and it contains 11 agents that inhibit NF-kappa B. So it's a great anti-inflammatory, effectively. And sometimes I find kappa S more useful in individuals. Sometimes I find the curcuma X on its own, which is a higher strength one, effectively. So information on NF-kappa B. Here I'm detailing dosing with you, and I think I'll move on through some of the dosing because you can read those at your leisure. And I'm not recommending all these products at once by any means, but I have used quercetin 300 with Allergy L92, and I would not use curcuma X with a kappa S. So really fundamentally to choose one of these, and one or two certainly maximum. Now let me talk about histamine breakdown and binding. Well, the homocysteine metabolite formula helps with methylation, and methylation is one form by which histamine is dealt with. So that could be useful. We know how important methylation is. So that formula contains actually active B12, active folate with B6, and supports the healthy metabolism of homocysteine, which needs methylation effectively. Methionine is the precursor for the methylation cycle, and I find that's the most effective histamine binding agent that I've used. And vitamin C can also support that process as well as having a natural antihistamine effect. Here's what's in the homocysteine metabolite formula, and there's the dose on that page there. Methionine, a substrate for methylation pathways, and certainly after taking it for a few months, perhaps the cofactor B vitamins might be needed. It's true. We're becoming more and more aware, but not everything is methylation. I actually had a client on Monday who, on taking methylated B vitamins, ended up with permanent atrial fibrillation. Yes, permanent atrial fibrillation on the basis that they're taking the methylated B vitamins. So it's not something that is needed for everyone, and as Ben Lynch says, it's not all methylation. So it's just being aware of things, and it's complex, but effectively. But methionine, very useful antihistamine, and certainly after a period of time, then certainly it's worth considering exploring the need for that individual's B vitamins. Is it the non-active B vitamins like hydroxycobalamin rather than methylcobalamin, or do they need the active forms? Methionine, very useful binder, best taken away from food for that effect. Vitamin C again has some quercetin within it, and the rutin, which is a cell membrane stabilizer. Very useful form of vitamin C. This one with grapeseed extract, again anti-inflammatory activity in that. So for immune modulation, Allergy L92, you've got lots of information on L92, the strain Lactobacillus, and on Luteolin. And there's also something that Russian choice immune. And here's some information. Effectively, it's a cell wall bacteria from a specific strain of bacteria, first identified in 1980s by Russian researchers, hence Russian choice being the name. And it's something called Lactobacillus delbrueckii species bulgaricus, and that refers to Bulgaria, effectively. And it's a specific strain of Lactobacillus rhamnosus. And effectively, these cell wall fragments help to drive a mucosal immune mechanism that may have effects beyond the location in their gut. And the possible mechanisms beyond the pairs patches, and effectively helps to support a balance of Th1, Th2, increasing INF interferon gamma and decreasing interleukin 4. Remember I said beware of those cytokines, remember them because I'll mention later on, and this is partly why. The Russian choice immune helps to increase interferon gamma, which is the Th1, and decreases interleukin 4, which is Th2. So it helps help that immune modulation effect. So it could be useful for allergies. The dosing of these two together. I didn't put Russian choice on the map, on the mind map I drew for allergy and Hayfever, but it could well be there for immune modulation. I think I did, he says. So I've given you the adult dose and the child dose. Now the most I've used for Allergy L92, I have actually recommended 4 a day for one person for a short period of time, and it had a benefit, and then they were able to reduce it. So in certain instances, of course, individuals may need more, and some individuals may need less. The idea is we have a therapeutic impact, benefit, and then we aim to find the lowest dose to maintain that. The Russian choice immune, again, 1 capsule with each meal, may need more, may need less, but that would typically be the dose to start with. And then we have mucosal immune support. Vital, as we all know, this is something that I'm teaching my grandmother, psych eggs. All of us in the room, as it were, here, I'm sure is fully aware of the importance of mucosal immune support. So I won't dwell too long on that. But these supplements, I would choose from 1 or 2 of these supplements, possibly 3 if I was aiming to support mucosal immune support, in order to support that barrier function and also create a situation where there's allergy, no immune reaction, rather than too much. And here I've summarized the dosing of those particular supplements. I know it's vital if a product is recommended to us, that's one thing. And then, well, what dose do I give? And here's a guide. It's always a guide. And so you need to use your clinical skills and experience after that. Digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid, very, very important. As I've indicated, one of my verbal case history about someone taking hydrochloric acid, it was actually the betaine plus HP, and the hay fever resolved completely without any other intervention. I wasn't recommending it for the hay fever, I hasten to add. I was recommending it for the digestive issues, and then the hay fever resolved as well. So that was something that was a coincidence. The full spectrum digest is a broad spectrum digestive enzyme. Again, it breaks down the middle peptides, so the endopeptidases as well as the exopeptidases at the end of the protein chain. So it helps to break it up more and then lessen the exposure to antigenic proteins, eliciting an allergic response. And here's dosing for those supplements as well to consider. So hopefully you'll use this as a resource. And I'm just reiterating here the things to consider for when someone's got hay fever allergy. What do we consider? Is it a big digestive issue? Do we need mucosal immune support with digestion? Do we need to bind to the histamine just to give some relief along with natural anti-inflammatory antihistamine? And do we need to have immune modulation with T regulation induction? And to achieve that, here's one consideration. If I were to choose 5 supplements for someone perhaps with more extreme symptoms, here are things I would consider. So we've got the Allergies L92 with luteolin, quercetin, another flavonoid, all helping to reduce the histamine release, binding onto histamine with methionine, espulade for immune regulatory and mucosal immune support, and digestive support. So that's one consideration for I would say, a relatively extensive program with 5 supplements. I'm not suggesting you take 5 supplements or have them for every patient, but there's one thought. Here's another one. So the next slide shows another choice of supplements. You've got the Russian Choice Immune for its activity on immune modulation in the gut, Allergies L92 for its multiple effects. The esterol ester could be something you choose as a natural antihistamine. Remember, it does have quercetin, rutin, and some grapeseed extract in it as well. And vitamin D3 complete contains vitamins A, D, E, and K, vital for the gut lining and mucosal immunity. In this instance, I've chosen betaine plus HP. So you can see how you can mix and match different supplements for different people, and that really is your clinical skill. And I want to give you here a basis or a platform on which to be able to make those choices, so you don't have to necessarily do all the hard legwork of preparing this information. That's the whole point of these webinars, is to give you a leg up, but to give you information that actually means you don't have to do it yourself. I mean, it took me hours to put this together, and I gave one last year in June, and I've added to that now. So it takes hours to prepare this, and I hope it's been useful and effective for you, for sure. Just a word about supplements before we end, and the hour goes by quickly. And again, really appreciate your time listening in. Aim to use the fewest supplements to achieve an effect. I always recommend that. And you want to, at the same time, to help to achieve that, as I put on the bottom line here, identify foods that are causing you a problem. If you don't identify those, you can take all the supplements you like and it won't have a positive outcome. And to help to choose that, I found that clinical experience, a detailed review of the case history, allied with symptoms. Lab testing can be useful, yes, but it can be expensive, cumbersome, and actually it can give you misleading information as well. In terms of, oh, I never eat that food, I react to it, and I react to this food, it didn't come up. Because the lab testing is only looking at IgG4 mediated reactivity, or if you use the Cyrex test, it is IgA and IgG, and that's the best test, but that's expensive and cumbersome to engage in with every client. So clinical experience, detailed review of case history, lab testing, yes, and I find kinesiology and muscle testing I find very useful indeed, very accurate and very helpful. It always brings up stuff that I would never have thought about or known about, so I'm a big fan of that. So individuals might require 2 or 3 supplements, it may require 5 or 6, and the 2 examples I gave previous slides, there were 5 supplements, but I don't often recommend 5 supplements if I can help it to someone, aiming at targeting exactly what they need. And the supplements described here provide effective doses of the remedies, and it may well be possible to recommend fewer than those 5 that I did recommend, especially when you've got the case history detail and you can target the supplements better. For me, I'm always aiming to have a therapeutic impact with a supplement, not to cover all their nutritional needs with supplements. So we know it's, as we summarize and end, again, really appreciate your time here, and also lots of information. I hope you can maybe put this webinar notes in an appropriate place and then go back to it in the future, or make a note that you can do. I know it's tough to find the time sometimes. So allergy and sensitivity and reactivity to things in our environment is more now than ever before. The The environment, so it's antigens and toxin exposure, food intake, chronic sympathetic overflow, otherwise known as stress. The changing and diminishing gut microbiome and diversity have a significant impact on immune tolerance. And there are numerous nutritional, non-pharmacological means by which it's possible to improve tolerance and resolve symptoms of allergy. And in my experience, it's almost always possible to have an impact. So I welcome anybody coming with allergic reactivity, so we would support their health. Of course, we want to look to their gut and their gut lining and digestion. So yes, it involves that, but there's some great tools out there to support the health and have tremendous impact on an individual's health. And it's such a massive issue, becoming more and more common. So here, what I've done is I've highlighted my favorite choices for reducing inflammation and helping allergy and hay fever. So you can see the ones I've highlighted there: the quercetin 300, the Allergies L92, the Curcuma RX, the Kappa S. Again, might use one or two of those only any one time. Full spectrum digest to break down food, and the Espelate and Lacto GG, hugely well documented probiotic yeast and bacteria. And the vitamin D3 complete, something I use extensively and frequently, is the combination of vitamins A, D, E, and K. So I use that. So we come to the end. I want to thank you very much indeed. It's bang on 1 o'clock. Got through the slides. Appreciate lots of information. Please do ask me a question. Not detailed case histories, but if you do have that, and then I would certainly recommend you go to a new clinical education forum. We're going to send you a specific slide or a message or an email, just giving you the web address for our new clinical education forum if you have not joined that, because we moved from LinkedIn, which became very cumbersome, and we've created a whole new platform we're completely in charge of, where all the comment can be seen in one screen, not multiple comments, and the search function is very good. So that's part of my life and part of what we offer here for free at Nutri-Link and clinical education. So anything longer than about case histories, but any other questions, please ping them to me within the next 48 hours. And I can see the chat coming up here. I'm just going to have a look at that. So thanks for your comment. Appreciate that. Just really appreciate your being here. I only do it for you, but I'm hoping it is something that's just really useful and effective in terms of information. So lots of information for you, mechanisms, detailed molecular mechanisms and sequences and pathways described in these notes, as well as practical recommendations. And I'd like to really wish you well with and you're looking forward to any client that now comes in with allergy or hay fever, and you have now got more information about the tools you've already been using, or indeed you've now got information about tools that are new to you that you can use to have the great outcome for your clients, improve the quality of life. And once we've improved the quality of their life, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that once you've achieved that, especially if you achieve it in a swift period of time, they're listening, and their ability to perhaps engage in other changes that you have for them to then support their health for the future and their families is then much higher. So it's not just always about the immediate, is it? It's if you improve the allergy or hay fever, for example, they're then much more open to the next part of the conversation, which is about making the right choices, eating organic food, and nourishing themselves and their family for today and the future. So on that note, I'm going to end. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate your company. Again, I can see who you were. Sorry we're not in the same room together. And I look forward to your questions if you have any. I'll do my best to get them out. I'm actually away next week, but really appreciate your attention. It's been lovely to spend time with you, even if it is online only. So I'm going to say for all, I'm going to close it off there. Thanks for your company. I look forward to our next contact. Bye for now.